how's the weather in Burlingame, California right now?
Right now, at this specific point in time, it's fairly decent. It's probably cloudy. I can't actually see outside, but it was a very hot day today. It was around 80 degrees at my school. Fortunately, in Burlingame, I live on the water, so it's a bit more windy and protected from the heat. But we've had a bit of a heat wave this last week. It hit 90 degrees at school yesterday, which is a bit unpleasant. But,
Wait, like,
you get that more often in the Midwest, don't you?
well, I mean, I take it your school has air conditioning, yeah?
It does, but with COVID, some stuff is moved outside, and also having to run outside after school can
Oh,
still be a bit
ew.
hard.
Yeah, that sounds brutal. No, but here in the Midwest, it's still. You remember? I think I told you like before how the worst weather that we get are mildly annoying thunderstorms that last for 2 weeks.
Right.
Yeah, I think we're in the middle of one because it's raining. It was pretty depressing all day, but it was raining for almost all of today, and yesterday, and the day before. So, and the day before that, I forgot. So, the weather's not too great here. It's just wet. And
Well, to me, that sounds pretty nice. I mean, California actually has a reputation for people loving 70-degree weather and warmer weather, but I feel like even though I've lived in California for 17 years, I would really appreciate some rain right now because, of course, we are in a huge drought.
well, I mean, the weather, it's mostly like by Los Angeles, eh? Santa Barbara, Long Beach, Malibu, that sort of beach weather.
But even those cities now are starting to get pretty hot consistently in the summer. Well, actually, I was in Santa Barbara earlier in the summer, and that's nice because it really doesn't get above 75 there. But LA in particular has been warming up, and especially the valleys north of LA have been awful, like close to 100 degrees every summer.
I would take this time to transition and be like, oh my god, you know what? You know where else is super dry and hot? But before I do that, I also do want to point out that the weather that I'm experiencing right now, of it being, mildly raining and also cold and depressing and gloomy, is also the same weather that I will be experiencing in the United Kingdom.
And is that something you're looking forward to? I would assume no, but who knows?
I'm not looking forward to the weather. Because it is set to be cold and gloomy and rainy and depressing and all of that, and windy, I presume. But I am looking forward to being on a steam railway, the oldest preserved in the world. That I am looking forward to, absolutely.
And remind me, you're there for more than a month, right? You leave in 5 days on Monday.
Yeah,
I
I'll
guess
be there. I'll be there
4 days for you.
For like a month exactly. And then afterwards, I'll be going other places in the UK. Mostly to Edinburgh, where I have my cousin. My cousin lives in Edinburgh, so I'll be staying with him as well. But the whole route, it will probably be, cold and dark and depressing, just as British weather usually goes, eh?
Well, to me, that sounds pretty lovely, but, I'm accustomed to different weather patterns. And I guess maybe in a sense it's better than what it could be because you're not there at the peak of winter time.
Yeah, I guess so. But by the way, in terms of other things that are going on, how are college apps for you?
I'm in an interesting position. Today, actually, I met with a teacher at my school who had some feedback from my Common App essay, which was great. It was necessary, and I need to do some revising. But I still have, what is it? It's 40 days until the early decision deadline or early action deadline for school, so still a decent amount of time for domestic applications. I'm not looking to apply anywhere internationally. I know you are, which I would assume runs on a different timeline.
Yeah, the schools in, outside the U.S., they all have varying timelines of their own. Some don't even, start until next April, which is interesting. But you feel that the college is also going smooth, the application process at least.
Yeah, you said you feel like colleges are going through the application process?
No, like, do you feel the college application process is still going smooth for you?
Yeah, it's good. It's nice that I don't have to focus on a lot of the apps until what is it, January, when the regular decision deadline is for most schools. So at least at this point, it's nice to have some time to focus on schoolwork because some of the schoolwork is picking up.
And remind me, what was your top choice again?
I'm still debating whether to apply early for Princeton or Cornell. I have heard from my counselor that Cornell is a fairly within reach school to apply to for early decision, and I have a decent chance of getting in. So that might be something I pursue, but Princeton also has a lot of interesting opportunities, and I generally would prefer that environment better, I think, just because it's way more focused on the undergraduate students and the classes are smaller. And at at Cornell, you're surrounded mostly by like super large class sizes.
At Cornell, you're mostly surrounded by corn. Is that what you want to say?
But I was actually going for the fact that the professors really only care about research and not actually the students.
I have been, and I will continue to put all my weight into trying to discourage you from going to Cornell. Because there's absolutely nothing there. At least Princeton, even though it's like, not too close to the city center, at least, there's a train that goes to the campus, which is good. Cornell, you don't get any of that.
Well, then what about the schools that you're applying to? Like, you're thinking of a school in Bulgaria, right? That's in like the center of the country that's not really near a major city, is it?
I mean, that's more of a, safety school, if you will. All the other schools I'm applying to are in, have good transit links. The Bulgarian school is mostly just, hey, if all other schools reject me, I'll be going to Bulgaria. But rest assured, I am not going to somewhere that is like Cornell. And you shouldn't either, because this is literally a podcast called Transit Talk, hosted by, I believe, as it says in the description, 2 transit fans, transit lovers. And for you to spend 4 years just wallowing away in a place that has no transit connections whatsoever would just be horrible. And
well, I do want to stand up briefly and say that they do have a very good bus system, and I was very impressed by how many buses were running around the university and in the city center.
Yeah, it's easy to have a lot of buses when there's nothing in your tiny town.
But I think it's important to say, at least because we are a podcast about transit, that buses are a form of transit, and it's good transit in most cases.
Okay,
it's not passenger trains, but who cares?
Okay, well, I mean, at this point, you might as well just say that, like, I don't know, the best public transit can be found in, I don't know, can be found in, a super poor city in, South America or Africa, because there are a lot of buses for the same logic.
I think you could say that. Well, actually, if you go back and for the viewers out there, I do believe I said in the episode we did on best public transit in the U.S., I said that the city with the best in the U.S. was Park City, Utah, which has a very good bus system that is electric on some lines. So
you're not gonna budge, are you?
I mean, I totally understand that Ithaca is in no way connected to any other city by transit at all. And while they might have a good local bus system, obviously it's nice to have some inner city connections, which they lack completely.
Yeah, Ithaca, New York, and upstate New York, it's like, what? The nearest decent-sized city is Syracuse, and that, like, has no public transit either.
Right.
The best you can do is take, what is it, what's the Amtrak route? The Lakeshore Limited?
There's the Empire Service, Maple Leaf, Lakeshore Limited.
Okay, well, the Maple Leaf, okay, yeah. You can go up to Syracuse and then take that down to New York City. Or you can take a 4-hour bus ride from Ithaca City to New York City. Did I just say Ithaca City? No, from Ithaca, the town of Ithaca, to New York City. Which I think I looked at the prices, it costs like $50. Or maybe it was $30.
It's like almost 3 times the price of the Edinburgh to London overnight bus.
Oh yeah, ugh, I'm gonna need to. I'm gonna need to book that ticket soon. From, although maybe not to Edinburgh right now, but at least from London to Birmingham, get an overnight bus and then take the train to Taiwan. Gotta save that money, but yeah. So let me ask you another question, just so we can get things going. And I think I've asked you this before, but I keep forgetting. Have you been to Africa ever? Because I know you've traveled a ton of places.
Of course not. I've not been to Africa. I've not been close to Africa.
You've been to Spain, yeah?
I've been to Barcelona, which maybe is close. It's not as close as it could be, but...
You've been to Italy?
No.
What's the closest you've ever been to Africa? Mine's Maine.
I think Barcelona would be the closest.
Actually, technically, Nova Scotia. My bad.
So I've not been to Africa.
Okay. But as you can tell by the title, today's episode is about Africa, and it is about the railway and the only railway in the country of Mauritania. I gotta say, right before we started filming, right before we started recording, I was going on because, it really just sort of struck me that how little we actually think about Mauritania. Because, I've known about Mauritania for a long time, and, that is my flex of the day. But it's really astounding how little Mauritania is ever mentioned. We think about Morocco tons, Algeria plenty, sure, Libya absolutely,
and even Senegal too.
Yeah, Senegal, Mali. We think about Mali too, but Mauritania, it gets almost no mentions whatsoever. Hey,
exactly, and yeah, maybe it is that it's overshadowed by a lot of these other countries nearby, and I guess maybe people buying backpacks from the Timbuktu brand that just, I guess, only enhances Mali's soft power. But I mean, maybe it is just a product that Mauritania is fairly small in terms of its population. It is actually the 28th largest country in the entire world, but it really is not densely populated at all.
Well, I guess another reason, which may be sort of another factor, is that Mauritania is of the North African countries, Mauritania is really the only one that has zero part of its desert. I'm sorry, zero part of its territory to not be desert, eh? I mean,
Yeah.
there is the Senegal River, which runs on the southern border, but the vast majority of the country is just plain uninhabitable Sahara Desert, right? At least, with Morocco and Algeria, you have the bit in the north that is decently arid. And then Mali and Niger have portions in the south too, with rivers and more greener areas. Same, I guess, sort of same thing with Egypt, of course. But Mauritania is really the only one that doesn't have any of that, and I guess that's sort of also an explanation for maybe why it's more economically deprived than the other countries. And there's also not a lot of financial centers too, huh?
It's almost like carving out a section of Algeria and southern Algeria and northern Mali and calling it a country, and then maybe giving it a coastline. And I guess that's very much reflected in what the actual layout of the country is, where the two biggest cities are on the coast. You have Nouakchott, the capital, and Nouadhibou, which is the second largest city, both on the coast, which give it, I guess, some semblance of not being a desert. But besides that, there's really nothing as you go more inland, because of course it gets into the deep Sahara Desert with the really harsh conditions, and their industries too. It's based mostly on mining and some fishing and other industries like that are coastline based. So you're right that its geography is not really conducive to economic success.
Mm-hmm. And I guess it's also sort of talking a little bit more about the geography of the country, it's sort of more like, the deserts that you see in, I guess, sort of Namibia or maybe even Chile, where the coastline, despite being water abundant, right, is direct desert. It's desert as soon as it hits the coast. There isn't a period of gradual transition into a more wetter climate by the coast, which is incredibly hampering for the country too. Because if you look at satellite images of the largest city, Nouakchott, you'll see that it is entirely a desert city, despite being right on the coast. Which, it's as you said before, the entire economy is sort of dependent on natural resources, and very coastline based. It's a blessing to have that coastline, because otherwise there'd be almost no connections to the outside world. But the natural resources, however, are what we are going to talk about actually today, because Mauritania has resources in plenty, and there has to be some way to get that from the Sahara Desert to the world.
Exactly, and if you also look at the Google map of Mauritania, it's clear that their road network is not very extensive either. You really only have a couple major highways that, I guess, go outwards from Nouakchott, but especially where the bulk of the mining is, which is in the north of the country, especially near the town of Zouerat, where there's a lot of iron ore mines, it would not be very convenient to have to rely heavily on road transport to take all of the iron ore, which there is a significant amount of, on trucks, which it takes a significant amount of time. I believe it's like 13 hours just driving in a regular car if you wanted to go from Zouerat to Nouadhibou, and then a similar long distance to Nouakchott. So, as this is transit talk, I think clearly that opens itself up to train opportunities, which fortunately Mauritania has taken advantage of, and they have built a train line that runs between Zouerat and Nouadhibou, which is significantly shorter than that road network, and they, like we have talked about, they use it for mostly economic reasons rather than passenger reasons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, do you think you could sort of give us a little bit of maybe a few facts or a little bit of history about this line? Because it is, again, as we said, the only rail line, period, in the entire country of Mauritania, eh?
Yeah, it is the only rail line in Mauritania, and it opened in 1963, and it has also been the only rail line constructed, and they haven't really constructed anything since, but it's managed to be successful, and like we mentioned, it goes from Zouerat to Nouadhibou. It's 704 kilometers, and also, given that there's a significant amount of iron ore that needs to be carried, these trains end up being really long and also operate daily too. So they're consistently up to 3 kilometers in length, which is about 1.5 miles. It's a bit less than 1.5 miles. So it's a pretty long train, and given that they run daily, that's a lot of iron ore that they're transporting, which is about 17,000 tons per train, which as these stats have noted, is enough to build a single Eiffel Tower. So the amount of iron ore it's carrying is quite significant.
Yeah, and also, I guess sort of another thing which, should be mentioned now is that right north of Mauritania, for those who are familiar with geography, is the disputed territory of Western Sahara, which is disputed which historically has been disputed both with a Mauritanian claim, a Moroccan claim, and also an independence movement. And because of this railway, the geography, it runs almost entirely along the border, including a little section which actually transverses a tiny bit of Western Sahara as well. Back when tensions were fiercer between Mauritania and the Polisario Front, which is the independent militia of Western Sahara, this railway was the target of frequent attacks, both due to its proximity, but also because of its central importance for the country. It was because of the attacks and the constant disruption of these sorts of shipments that really crippled the Mauritanian economy back in the day, and is part of the reason. It's also been an influence in why Mauritania has not been so much of a player in the Western Sahara dispute as well. But again, that's just a little bit of politics and history there. Yeah, so let's talk about this actual red line itself. So Jack, you, I presume you have not been on this train, have you?
Unfortunately, no, I have not.
I've
not been close.
You've not been close. Have you seen any accounts online?
I have, and I watched one a couple months ago, having no idea that this train line existed, and it was really fascinating just to even realize that it existed and that people would do it and that they would be exposing themselves to so many different dangers on so many different fronts. Not to mention that it's, at least in those videos, they claim it's illegal to even ride it as a passenger. And some of you viewers may be wondering, I didn't even consider that you could ride this train as a passenger because you just mentioned that it was solely to carry iron ore. But in fact, it is actually used for passenger service sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, the first time I saw it was in the famous National Geographic online short documentary about the line. And the first time I saw it, I was like, oh my god, this seems so amazing. Both because it's just so, foreign. So, unlike, what you would see anytime in the United States, right? Both, not just because of the desert environment, like that, absolutely. But also because of the lifestyle of the people. And also because of the fact that, if you try to do the same thing with an iron ore train here in the United States, you get arrested at the next station and then, put in jail for, 5 years for trespassing and whatnot.
Yeah, it's so difficult to do anything like it in most, I guess, countries that are cracking down on trespassing on trains, especially the developed countries. So at least from when I heard about it, I mean, mostly it inspired a sense of wanting to go do it. I did watch the Yes Theory video, which I guess always tries to inspire people to seek discomfort and to do things out of their comfort zone, which just probably would be for anyone, even seasoned travelers like people at Yes Theory themselves, because there's just so much involved that you have to prepare for and to experience and to know. There's a lot of prep you have to do beforehand, all just for this overnight train journey on an iron ore train.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit about how do you actually go about writing it. You said that you've watched Travelers Yes Theory, people who've actually taken it. So you're the guide, right? How would one go about, first of all, taking this train?
Well, first off, like we mentioned, the train runs from Zouerat to Nouadhibou, and it makes, I believe, an intermediate stop in Choum, Mauritania, which is right on the Western Sahara border, and it's right where the tracks actually go into Western Sahara. But the train runs in both directions. You can actually go either way, from Nouadhibou to Zouerat or Zouerat to Nouadhibou.
Well, I mean, first of all, step one, arrive in Mauritania. Yeah.
Well, yeah, of course. And actually, it is actually not super straightforward getting to Nouadhibou either, because most flights into Mauritania fly into Nouakchott. So you first have to get to Nouadhibou, which you can drive or take a plane to. But that is definitely, by and large, the largest city that this train serves, so it would make sense to either to get on there or get off there.
Yeah, so the line runs between Nouadhibou, which is on the west coast, and then Zouerat, which is pretty centrally, northern centrally located, deep within the Sahara Desert. The train runs between those two cities, but the problem is that most people arriving to Mauritania, as limited as they may be, arrive in Nouakchott, the larger city, which is further down south on the coast. And it's only, within the entire country, Nouakchott is the only, major airport by any sort of standard. Nouakchott Airport has, of course, Nouadhibou has flights as well, but Nouadhibou only has flights within other cities in Mauritania. It's only in Nouakchott that you find the foreign flights, the foreign connections, including Air France and Turkish Airlines and Royal Air Maroc, major airlines which connect their own countries to Mauritania. So for most people, it's really a question of how exactly do you get from Nouakchott to either one of the cities on the railway, either one of the termini. I read some trip reports and some accounts of their own trips, and I think, first of all, a big tip that I saw some people giving was that it's much more preferable to take the train going westbound, either from Zouerat or from Choum, the town in between, and going there to Nouadhibou, rather than taking it eastbound. Because if you go westbound, that's when all the iron ore is loaded up, and that's when you can get the real experience. Whereas if you take it eastbound, it's just an empty train.
Well, and that's what Yes Theory did too. They started in Zouerat. Well, I think primarily the bigger issue is if you go eastbound and you get off in either Choum or Zouerat, there's really not much you can do in terms of transportation to actually get back to civilization of some kind. Whereas it's far easier, right? But it's far easier to find, say, a taxi cab or like a shared taxi or a bus service or even a flight if you end in Nouadhibou and go elsewhere in the country or just back to Nouakchott. So, from a transport perspective, it's much easier to start in a big city and take a cab out there rather than to find yourself alone there.
Right, but you know what else is another major consideration?
What?
The essentials for life, including food, water, and shelter, right? So the tiny towns of Choum and Zouerat, it's not super guaranteed that all of those will be easily findable, especially as a foreigner. The shelter aspect, especially, is a major consideration because the whole journey, right? The whole journey is thousands of kilometers through. Hundreds of miles through the empty Sahara Desert, on a disused on an old rail car inside of the rail car. So it does get incredibly dirty, especially when going westbound. When all the iron ore is loaded up and then the wind is blowing that as well as the sand. And so if you're ending your journey in Nouadhibou on the west coast, it's much more easier to find, for example, a hotel, a place to stay, and then get clean and then make yourself presentable again, than it is going eastbound and then having to stop in these tiny towns, and then there may not even be a guarantee of any of that.
Yeah, it's really funny how dirty people look when they come off the train if they go westbound. I mean, they almost look like pirates with all of the iron ore covering their face and dishevelment from that the train causes.
Yeah, I mean the whole journey takes around 21 hours. Wow,
Yeah, it leaves in the evening and it arrives in the mid morning in Nouadhibou.
Yeah, it takes It's quite a it does go overnight, as we mentioned. So the whole thing is just it's a super dirty, super loud experience too, because it's a 3-kilometer long train journey. Not exactly going to be super quiet. Also,
no.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and the actual movement of the train is, as I've heard, some of the worst part about it, where you're constantly moving back and forth, and like you're hitting the sides of the train cars, and trying to sleep is miserable because it's so rocky, and the train is often stopping and starting, which has a bunch of like jerky motions.
Yeah, I've also read that on the accounts, the trip reports, especially when you're not given any sort of surface even, and it's just a huge pile of iron ore that you're just trying to sleep on, whilst the wind is still blowing everything in your face and the train is going clickety clack, the entire night. So it doesn't seem like a super appealing aspect in that respect. But, unanimously, from all people who have taken this journey online, have abundantly praised the journey for example, the scenery, right? For example, the desert landscape, where there are no roads and there's almost nothing around you for miles. That scenery is absolutely amazing. Of course, you have to, wrap your head and cover up, to prevent any sand or wind damage. The scenery of the desert is amazing, as well as the nighttime view of the sky. Because it is the desert, It's one of the most
and there's no light pollution.
Exactly, right? There's no huge cities anywhere. So, what I've heard and what I've seen online is that it's one of the most perfect places to just gaze up at the stars, because there's nothing for hundreds of miles.
Yeah, and the timing of it is great because it allows you to get on. I mean, if it's on time, I think it leaves around noon-ish, which seemingly never happens because at least in the videos I've watched, the train was always delayed. But it leaves such that you can see the sunset, that you can sleep on it, you can see the sky at night where there's really good views, and then you wake up in the morning and you come into Nouadhibou. But that also means that for at least the first maybe 5 or 6 hours, you're also dealing with the major triple like 100+ degree heat, which is also a very difficult, probably the most difficult part of the journey.
Yeah, the heat, it can get over 40 degrees Celsius regularly in the day, because again, it is the Sahara.
Well, and with the iron ore being black and the train car being black, it's going to absorb a ton of heat, and with the pollution from the train engine, I mean, it's not, the heat index is not favorable at all to any rider.
Yeah, it's definitely not one that you would do for comfort purposes.
I think we need to be clear that this is definitely not a train for passengers, and that it literally is technically illegal for passengers to actually ride the train in the first place. I mean, there is no enforcement of that, and locals do this all the time, but it's really just trespassing onto a freight train and sleeping in the iron ore cars for 21 hours.
Well, I mean,
to go from
it's not
a mining town.
It's not trespassing per se, because, as you said, right, it is the local way of life. So, for example, in the aforementioned National Geographic short documentary, there were pictures of segments of a young man who uses the train. He's a fisherman in Nouadhibou, so he catches fish in Nouadhibou and then takes the train all the way down to the mining town of Zouerat and then sells his fish there, which can earn him total around $50, $50, which comparatively for Mauritania is amazing. People like him, right, would take the train the whole way, essentially for free. And let's get this straight, right? Again, the train is completely free because it's not an advertised passenger service. You don't need tickets or anything. But people like him, they would take the train from Nouadhibou all the way to Zouerat and then sell their products, and then maybe rest a day or two, and then take the train back to continue the market cycle, if you will. So it's really become you encounter this a lot in the world of transit, but this really is a lifeline for a lot of the people, especially in Zouerat or other towns further in.
And Choum too. A
Yeah.
lot of locals get off there. At least when in the Yes Theory and Drabinski video, they did notice that most of the people got off in Choum. Some people do get on as well, but not everyone takes the journey the entire way. But it also helps to have daily service too, where you can constantly rely on the train every day and know that there will be service at some point, even if it's not scheduled, to take you either into the desert or closer to the coast.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah. So let's actually. I know we sort of took a little bit of a detour, but let's get back to the point of actually riding it, right? So as you did say, the train does go every single year, and the majority of the people do go to and from Nouadhibou and Choum instead of all the way to Zouerat, because I did read online that this is what they also recommended from prior travelers, because there is not too much not too many exciting things going on in Zouerat, and it's also more hard to get to, especially if you're taking the train westbound. Even the locals, mostly go to Zouerat if they actually physically work in the mines. Most normal people actually just stay in the small town of Choum. But the total journey takes about 14 hours from Choum to Nouadhibou, and then if you take it all the way from Zouerat to Nouadhibou, it takes another 5 hours, so approximately 19-20 hours in total for the entirety of the line, which again runs every single day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wasn't actually aware that most people, at least the tourists, would get off in Choum, at least because to me, on its face, Zouerat seems like the larger city with the bigger industries, and at least that's where in the Yesterday video, Drabinski and Thomas from Yesterday got on. It is like you said, a much longer drive to get out there, but at least for the local purposes, I believe generally Choum is more frequented, especially because Zouerat in itself is mostly a mining town and not really a town, I guess, where you would sell fish as often than you would in a place like Choum.
Yeah, Choum is actually not a city, not even a town. It's on online descriptions. It's actually mostly sort of just a little outpost with a few mud buildings. But
its satellite imagery is fascinating because there's almost no paved roads, like zero paved roads, and everything seems to be like covered in walls, and it's really just centered around the train station.
Yeah, exactly. It's like I said, right, mostly just mud buildings. But then afterwards, if you keep going east, you pass through there used to be the Choum tunnel through the mountains that lie just east of Choum, but since then, the line has been since the tunnel closed, the line has taken the tiny bit of railway which goes into the territory of Western Sahara, and then continues on to Zouerat. But again, right, the big question is when you arrive in Nouakchott, how do you get to Choum? And for that, for the websites, the itineraries, the experiences that I have seen on the internet, most people actually recommend going from Nouakchott to a town more south of Choum with more things to do, called Attar. And Attar is sort of like a quintessential the quintessential Sahara little outpost, right? Where people all the things you think of, for example, riding camels, going to sand dunes, and then at night gazing at the stars, right? Although I will say, because again this is Mauritania, the journey by car takes about 10 hours from Nouakchott to Attar, but it only costs about $20, which is absolutely amazing by Western standards, but certainly normal by Mauritanian standards.
Well, it's not comfortable, to be clear. Like, you're in a small car, dusty, probably not the best road quality, but I mean it's cheap, so.
And then after, well, yeah, it is cheap, but then afterwards from there, most people will then continue from Attar to Choum, and for approximately it's approximately 4 or 5 hours to go from Attar to Choum, again by car, because as we mentioned, there is no other sort of service. Plane service is limited in the country, as is there's no other train lines, and bus service is also very limited. So it's only based on individual cars, individual drivers that can take you, and from Choum it's another 4 or 5 hours up north. I'm sorry, from Attar to Choum it's another 4 or 5 hours, and then that's sort of where that's where you take the train. The road from Attar to Choum, because again Choum is it's not even a town. It's entirely off road, which is it certainly sounds exhilarating, but I imagine it would not be comfortable, in real time.
It does not make it. This description of this trip report does not make it sound enjoyable. I mean, albeit saying
Really?
uncomfortable for a 4x4 ride to the dusty little outpost called Choum.
It sounds. I guess the sort of image that I guess that sort of has is when we say 4x4 in the desert, it's like oh yeah, the deserts of the southwestern U.S. or the outback of Australia. That's sort of the image it conjures, but I presume it's also incredibly different from that, because it is the Sahara sand dunes, and it's not particularly tourism friendly, so.
No, and obviously Mauritania is not a frequented country at all, getting only 30,000 visitors per year. So clearly this train is not a tourist attraction whatsoever, nor is Tar or even in Choum or Zouerat, any of these cities have not clearly been designed for tourists.
Yeah, it's definitely not for tourists. Although recently in prior years, it's been gaining more notoriety because of the more people who find out about this, and the more adventurous people who seek out this sort of opportunity. But once you've made it to Choum, the trains going westbound, they leave generally around 6 p.m. around the time of sunset, but they are frequently late, and so it's just a waiting game. The important thing to know, which the few itineraries, the few trip reports that I had looked at both stress this, that once the train does arrive in Choum, it only stops for an incredibly short amount of time, about 10 minutes. So you have to choose, your carriage, which car of iron ore you're gonna get in very quickly, and then you just have to climb on, throw everything down, and then just get everything ready, because once the train gets moving, you can't hop on, but also it's incredibly when you're going incredibly fast, and with the wind and the sand that's blowing at you, it's also not great to if you don't have everything set up, it won't be so great.
Yeah, for sure, and it's, you almost have to get on while it's stopped, and it's also not the easiest to climb into a boxcar essentially, with iron ore, with ladders that's tall and it's shaky. So getting on and also off is much harder than one would think. But of course, it's a freight train, so.
There's also, I'm sure, as you can expect, there's no onboard service either.
No, not at all, and people should not go in expecting that. It's quite the opposite.
Although I suppose if your diet consists, although I suppose if you're anemic, this is I don't think you'll be on a shortage of iron anytime soon.
Well, actually, I am taking iron pills for ferritin levels, so
Oh,
that just
there
gave
you
me a
go.
great idea for how to replenish my iron levels a lot more quickly.
There you go. I mean, it's a simple matter. Go to Mauritania and then get on this train, and then once you're in the carriage, just lie face flat, face flat on a lion ore and just start going away at it.
Yeah, but that is a reminder that if you do want to take this train, like what you wear and what you want to, I guess, be prepared for is incredibly important because throughout the entire trip, the winds are going to be bad and there's going to be tons of iron blowing in people's faces, and it's going to be hot and also cold at night. So a lot of people recommend wearing layers at night to make sure you're protected against the cold. I mean, obviously the biggest issue is probably going to be the actual, like, the sandstorms and the dust storms and also just the iron blowing in your face. And that's really, I think, what the harshest reality of the train is. And that's definitely what people should probably be the most prepared for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, actually, that's another good point because what you wear, absolutely, but also the fact that, because, again, it is the Sahara, it is a desert, at night it does get very, very cold because, the sand, even though it absorbs heat really quickly, it also loses it really quickly, eh? So it's important, although it may seem counterintuitive at first, but it's also important to make sure you have enough clothes, enough layers, right, as you said, to bring on this entire journey. Otherwise, as funny as it sounds, you may freeze to death in the Sahara Desert.
And it's so difficult because in one hand you have to be prepared for the heat and probably not wear as that many clothes, and you also have to be prepared for the cold, and people do bring sleeping bags too. I mean, of course, you do have to find some way to sleep while you're sitting on a heap of iron ore. So
I don't know. I think if I were on that train, I think if there were ever a time to pull an all-nighter, it'd be then.
That's a good point, and maybe that's an option. Although from what I've heard, people generally do want to sleep because at some point it just gets really miserable sitting and having all of the iron ore like get in your face, and it's scary in some degree just looking out into the middle of the darkness, not really knowing like what you're doing and whatnot. Like, I mean, there's a lot of things that can go wrong because like if you're stopped in the middle of the Sahara, there's nowhere you can go. I mean, in theory, you could walk across every single carriage and somehow get to the driver, but it is over a mile long.
That's actually a super terrifying prospect. If, like, for example, if the train's going and then you fall off the train, and then you survive, on the sand.
Well, at least the one good thing is that, I mean, in comparison to the survival stories I've heard of runners who have been lost in the desert, at least if you're next to the track, there is a guarantee that every day there will be a train that runs by you that you can try to hop on. But of course, you have to wait 24 hours.
I guess your best prospect is to just wait, make sure that whenever the next 24 hours later, when the driver comes, that you wave from a distance, and then hopefully you can stop in time. But wow, that is certainly a prospect. But to prevent that, right? Some other points that are definitely have been brought up by prior travelers include bring sunglasses, of course, both for the sun, also for the bright Sahara sand, but also to protect your eyes from the iron ore, which really does seem to get everywhere, as evident by the photos. And then also, it's incredibly important always, but especially now, with the Mauritanian railway, to bring tons and tons of water, as well as food. It's important to note, however, that with the point of food, actually, these prior travelers have recommended that you need to bring lots of food to make sure you survive the journey. But you can't really eat it when you're on the train because the train is going so fast and the iron ore is blowing everywhere that it just kind of, you can't really eat that. So what people recommend is to bring lots of food to Choum and then eat all of it before you jump on board, before you get on the train, so that you're able to be full and don't have to won't feel hungry again on the train and eat when it's impossible.
Yeah, and that's interesting. I hadn't heard that before, but I mean, definitely, you can't go and not bring food because you have to account for the possibility that you might get stuck.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, if you get on at Choum, you're also really only spending the night on the train and waking up and getting off, so you don't really have to eat necessarily. But maybe if you got on at Zouerat, where you're on for 21 hours, then probably it's good to have at least some snacks or whatever. Maybe like some kind of liquid calories.
Liquid calories, indeed. But again, right? Those are some of the tips that have been recommended. Important. I guess the most important thing to note is that this journey itself does not cost anything to the passenger. There is no ticket price. There is no ride price. There isn't any permission. You don't need to ask anybody. You don't need to book anything. You don't need to make any reservations. You just need to be there at the right time and hop on, and then do it. So it really is, the adventure journey.
Mm-hmm. And also one point to bring up on water, at least when in the video I watched with Yester and Drabinski, they seem to make a fuss out of going to the bathroom on the train and mention how it's probably best to bring extra water bottles and to pee into the water bottles so you don't have to sit off the side of the train or whatever, and then just dump out the water bottles, because I know people might be concerned about that. It is only 21 hours and you can probably limit your drinking, but then again, you're in the Sahara and it's over 100 degrees, so it's difficult to balance the two.
Yeah, we won't talk too much anymore about going to the bathroom on this train. I think it's more of a, when there's a will, there's a way.
Yeah, but I mean, I feel like it's something that people would be concerned about and needs to. There should be at least some tips for travelers, and I don't think that's made widely known enough. But I mean, it's 21 hours. You have to figure something out.
Mm-hmm. So I mean, I guess that's all the sort of details about how to take this train, and also a few of its details on its history and implications. It is, again, a major artery to the Mauritanian economy, which is heavily dependent on the mines of iron in Zouerat. If this train line were severed, right, it would almost it would be crippling, because then there would be very limited infrastructure. Almost
and we saw that happening too. When the conflict with Western Sahara was occurring,
right.
it was not good for the economy.
Right, exactly. But it is just absolutely critical, again, for the economy, but also for the people who have to commute regularly between the connections with the mines and also the connections by the sea.
Mm-hmm. Well, and maybe that prompts the question, should Mauritania be investing in more rail networks if they have the ability to? Should they try to run passenger service on this route? I mean, it's definitely not the most, I guess, conducive to passenger travel. They could easily open a line between Nouadhibou and Nouakchott, which probably would be more widely used by passengers. But I don't know, do you think Mauritania should be doing more rail investing along these lines? Because they still only have one line after 58 years.
Well, actually, there was, at one point, a passenger rail car, which was attached to the end of this iron ore railway. But for the majority of people who the demand was vastly greater than the supply, and for the majority of locals and tourists who come for the thrill still prefer to ride in the rail car. In terms of the actual rail network of Mauritania itself, I think it would certainly be beneficial, especially between Nouadhibou and Nouakchott. But again, remember, it's not entirely feasible, because it is, most of the line would be, plain desert sand. which could potentially lead to very, shall we say, it wouldn't be easy to construct at all. Just like how this line wasn't easy to construct, but it would be interesting to see if there could be more investment between the two cities along the coast, as well as connections inland as well.
Or maybe even just extending the existing line from Zouerat and providing a connection to Nouakchott, which is interesting because at least I was initially surprised why it went to Nouadhibou instead of Nouakchott, but it does appear that Nouadhibou in itself is quite a big port city, that there have been attempts from other mining companies to buy out the rail and port infrastructure in Nouadhibou to make it easier for them to make money off of it. But I guess for now, I mean, it doesn't really make a difference functionally going to Nouadhibou versus Nouakchott, because really the economics is centered. It's much more decentralized, I guess, than the population in the country, which is largely centered in Nouakchott.
Mm-hmm. No, it is very much centered in Nouakchott. The population of Nouakchott is I think 4 times greater than that of Nouadhibou, which is pretty significant.
And Nouadhibou itself is the only other city in Mauritania with over 100,000 inhabitants.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, and most people in most of the world have not even heard of either of the cities. So, again, it goes to show how we are not talking about any sort of mainstream country or city or railway line by any means. But I guess sort of, yeah.
Well, I was going to say the one thing we probably should I want to ask before we end this is, do you want to go on this train line anytime soon?
Well, that's what I was going to ask you exactly. And my answer is an astounding yes. Absolutely. This it seems like such an experience. Most people for their Sahara experience, they go to Marrakesh or something in Morocco, and then look, it's a tour company that just goes into the desert, right? This would be the real experience, deep in the Sahara, uncomfortable as it may be, whatever, right? It's not like we haven't had.
It'd be so amazing.
Yeah, I take it that you want to as well.
I would love to. I looked at flight prices, and it's supposedly $784 to fly from San Francisco to Nouakchott in some random date, I think in October, November.
Wait, actually? That's way too good to be true.
Well, I was surprised, and it's on Air France. So you fly SFO to Charles de Gaulle, and then Paris to Conakry, and then Conakry to Nouakchott, and then on the way back you just stop in Paris.
Wait, why is that so cheap?
I don't know. I mean, it seems like that's actually a consistent price. It's some days it's over 1,000, but for the most part, if you can fly on the days that Air France is operating that route, it's under 800.
Hold on, Mauritania is Mauritania open right now from COVID?
It's not actually showing up that they have restrictions on Google Flights, so they might be.
Okay, I found. Oh my god. This is so much cheaper than I had expected. Wow. I'm I'm honestly astounded by how I was expecting this to be in the thousands, because the demand to Mauritania is just so little.
Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe it's just the connection in Paris specifically, but I'm looking at flights from Chicago, and it's double the price from San Francisco.
It is. I'm looking at some of the prices right now, and the cheapest I found is from Washington Dulles for $756, one stop in Casablanca. Huh. Holy moly. Well, guess we know where to put on our. This is like a legitimate, option.
Yeah, hopefully the prices stay consistent, and we can do it at some point when you're not in Wales or in Japan.
hopefully it would be definitely more fun with, you know, not as a solo. I imagine it'd be decently lonely too. You know, it'd be super pensive when you're in sitting in the train and at night, and just thinking about everything.
Well, yeah, I can imagine doing it by yourself. Like, you'd have to go with somebody else.
Right, absolutely. But definitely, you know, we $700 from the United States to Mauritania. That is an astounding, amazing price, and yeah, let's go.
Yeah, hopefully soon. But anyways, that concludes our episode on the iron ore train in Mauritania from Zouerat to Nouadhibou, which hopefully by now you've picked up is one of the most unique and amazing train routes that passengers can actually go on. Yes, it's marketed as a freight train, but actually do not be deceived. And hopefully by listening to this, you'll be inspired to take similar train routes like that and to know that these routes are available for passengers, and they might be unsafe, but it's, as Yesteri says, people and travelers should seek discomfort sometimes.